Hi guys, welcome back to the Astro Imaging channel. Tonight's session is on imaging the sun while providing outreach by Stephen Ramsden. And Stephen's in the room, but before we get to him, I just want to show off our image of the week, which is by Kafir Simon. And I'm going to jump over to my other screen to show that off. Give me 1 second, just bear with me. And this is an amazing image, a southern sky image from Namibia, Tivoli Farms. Hope you can see that there. Yep, you can see it. I don't know if you know of Kafir Simon. You should. He posted this on Cloudy Nights. You should check it out so you can click to the full-size version because this is insane. A number of different objects: dark nebula, reflection nebula, and globular cluster. But just I don't know. This is beautiful. It's images like this that make me want to go down, check out what the southern skies have to offer. But I don't know if I could do it without Polaris. But
some details on the image, Adam. It's a two-frame mosaic. It's 1.5 by 3 degrees of the sky. He imaged it with his 16-inch f3.75 Dream Astrograph with Apogee Alta U16 monochrome camera. Each frame has 60 minutes of luminance and only 10 minutes per channel in RGB, so it's 3 hours total for the entire mosaic.
Thanks, Josh. Yeah, that's a pretty cool image. Some nice gear, but great image. And I think what we're going to do, first of all, as always, feel free to ask your questions. You can type your questions into Q&A if you're out there on the video side. Pretty soon we're going to open up the room if there are some spots available to anyone else that wants to get in. But ask your questions away, and I'll call them right out to Stephen. And Stephen's in the room, and I'm going to jump right over and hand it right over to him. Stephen, you're good to go.
Hey, Adam. Hey, guys. Thank you very much for having me on the show. I'm very grateful. So,
thanks for coming.
We're going to talk about solar astronomy a little bit tonight, and I want to tell you a little bit about what I do. And then might cover a little bit of the science, and then we'll go through some processing that anybody watching this can do on the first day of this hobby. This is a very, very easy thing to do. It's a great way to get into astronomy, and it's also a great way to get the public involved in science. So a little bit about me. There's another screen down here that has a presentation that I offer. Let's see if it updates. There you go. And what I am is a retired air traffic controller. And before that, I was in the U.S. military, U.S. Navy nuclear propulsion program. And I live in Atlanta, Georgia. I have no children. I'm married to an attorney. She ruins lives for a living, and I try to make life better for a living, so we balance out a little bit. But the whole point of my program, the Charlie Bates Solar Astronomy Project, is to get students 4th grade through high school interested in science. When I was young, growing up in the 60s, everybody I knew wanted to be an astronaut. Everybody knew about the Apollo program. Everybody knew we were going to the moon. I mean, it was a common topic among children everywhere. And I went to school, we talked about the Apollo program. That summer of 68, 69, 70, you couldn't go anywhere without somebody talking about the moon. That doesn't exist anymore, and people don't talk about space unless they're talking about a movie like Interstellar or something. Nobody looks up anymore. You can walk around any city. I live in downtown Atlanta, and you can pretty much walk around any large city, and you will see people looking down now. This is all people learn about anymore. So, hey, Johnny, sending text messages and using their cell phones. Nobody looks up and enjoys the natural beauty above them anymore. So, I owe all of this success, and I've had some pretty good success in life, but I owe it all to a 10th grade teacher who took me aside and took me off the football playing team and all that kind of crap, and which is, there's nothing wrong with that, but he took me out of that and said, you can do more with yourself than just get married, work at a factory, and do nothing. You can do science. Why don't you come here and learn some of this science? Guy's name was Mr. Jaber. I'll never forget him. So he teaches me a little bit of science, and I'm good at it. It was chemistry. I enjoyed it. It was really cool. And that one semester in high school pretty much changed the direction of my entire life. And this guy didn't get anything out of it. That's just his job. He loved to do it. And he spent a little time with me and got me to get involved in chemistry and physics and math. And then eventually, at the end of that year, I wrote an essay for a National Science Foundation contest where you got to go to a summer school. And I wrote this essay, and I won the competition, and I got to go to 6 weeks of college at Georgia Southern College that summer, and that was in 1981. And in walks the instructor, and it's Carl Sagan. So I spent my summer as a 15-year-old taking computer science courses and chemistry courses from Carl Sagan and Dr. Boxer. And this picture over here shows that, you know, it was a life-changing event. And of course, back then I took it for granted. I said, yeah, this is cool, whatever. But then when I got a little older and got established in my career, it really became apparent to me that the good fortune that it came my way was completely due to people who cared about me as a youngster. And I looked around in my community where I live in Atlanta, and there are so many students and so many children and kids that don't get any of that from anybody. They just get ignored. And they go to these schools where all you do is memorize questions to answer tests, and they don't teach reasoning anymore. So I thought in 2008, well, the impetus for this whole thing was my friend Charlie Bates killed himself, and it was one of those epiphanies where you look back at your life and you see what it's all about. So I determined that, number one, I wasn't going to let Charlie be remembered as the guy who killed himself. I wanted to do something in his honor. Number two, science was sorely, sorely needed in my community and all over this country. So I looked around, and my education was in mathematics and nuclear propulsion, spectroscopy. I looked around and I said, what can I do to get people involved in science? And it turns out that solar astronomy was just kind of kicking off still then. It was around, but nobody was really doing much outreach with it. Nobody was really sharing it much. So my wife and I decided we were going to go invest in a great deal of equipment to do solar astronomy, and we were going to teach that at schools. So I bought a solar telescope. I set it up at the local Starbucks in the summer of 2007. And within a month, I had 5 invites to go to schools and everything else. So it all kind of grew from there. I had never intended on being a global nonprofit. I just wanted to go share science. I didn't care about the rest of it. So within a year, we'd done 80,000 students and 70 schools, and I started accumulating this equipment. And it turns out that I had more telescopes than I needed. So I said, well, what am I going to do with this stuff? I can sit it in my garage and I can not share it, you know, let it gather cobwebs and dust, or I can just give it away to other people that want to do astronomy but can't afford these telescopes. So I started shipping everything extra that I had to other people, and it just kind of took off from there. As you know, everybody likes free stuff. And there were some scammers, and I did get taken advantage of, but I eventually got a good way in which I could determine who the people that were going to use the equipment were. And I started sending everything I had that I wasn't actively using to other people so they could use it for outreach. And really, it just blew up from there. I mean, we're in 22 countries now, and this program is by far the highest volume astronomy outreach program in the world. Hands-on astronomy outreach. You know, we're not giving somebody a pamphlet and just telling them, see you later. We're taking them to the telescopes, to the cameras. They do the observing. They do the imaging. And it seems to be very popular. So one thing I've learned in solar astronomy is that hardly anybody knows what they're looking at in these telescopes. Everybody's got a great line that they give to other people when they say, look in here and check this out. This is the red light coming from the sun. This is the surface of the sun. Check this out. Or, you know, this is, I don't know, I've heard a million different stories. So I thought I would just get involved a little bit and talk about what you're seeing in these telescopes. And if one of you guys needs to break in, you know, just break in. Number one, let me tell you something. Let's see, today's June 1st, tomorrow. I've seen about 700,000 people since I started this program, and that's one-on-one, me telling them about what they're doing. Out of that number of people, I can count on 2 hands how many people knew what the sun was made of, or knew how it worked. And these are students and teachers. So that's just been more motivation for me to keep going. And yeah, I live in Georgia, I know that, so I'm kind of handicapped. But that's the reality. People have no idea what the sun is or where the power comes from or how it's made. So you can throw a slide up like this one and say it's the proton-proton cycle. You know, it's 6 hydrogen atoms without their electrons combining and going through blah, 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 blah. And people don't care. They just, you lose them in about 20 seconds with that one. So I decided to just concentrate on the wonder of the sun. This is a time lapse of the sun as viewed from my balcony. And I don't know if you guys are getting this or not, but the sun is beautiful, and it rises and sets every day, and people just sort of ignore it. But it's a beautiful thing, and it's just right out there for everybody to look at. So I focused my program on the wonder of it all and not the deep down science. I'm trying to get people involved in science. I'm not trying to scare them off with how complicated it is. So I tell a story about the formation of the sun, and then I tell the tale of how it provides us with power. And I go along with, you know, I talk a little bit about how it works, but I want the person to want to know more about it. So in our outreach programs, we talk about the sun being hydrogen and hydrogen fusion, but we do it in a manner that's inviting for the student to look and find out more on their own. But I'm going to tell you guys, for those of you that don't know, when you have a light source, an incandescent light source, which the sun is, incandescence means any material that there is, if you heat it to a certain temperature, it will begin to emit visible light. That's why lava is red. That's why steel turns red and then white when you heat it. When you heat up the hydrogen that is the sun, of course it's heated by gravitational pull, and when it gets hot, it emits a continuous spectrum of visible light, as you can see from this diagram. There's no breaks in it. From the core of the sun where the fusion is occurring, it is emitting a continuous spectrum of visible light, plus all the other wavelengths, but what we see, the visible spectrum of continuous light. There's a gas cloud in between that light source and us, and it's called the chromosphere. That's the atmosphere of the sun. The sun contains elements from hydrogen all the way to uranium in trace amounts, mostly hydrogen and helium, of course, but just about every element naturally occurring on a periodic table is also present in the sun's chromosphere. So what you get is certain elements, when they get energized and then re-emit the energy, they cause an absorption line in the spectrum as seen on this slide. That black line in the middle spectrum there is caused by the hydrogen atom in the sun's chromosphere. The continuous spectrum leaves the surface of the sun. The hydrogen atom absorbs it. It likes it. It's nice. It makes a black line right there at 656.28 nanometers. So it's blocking that portion of the sun's spectrum, and a bunch of other places too.
Even you got to share your screen if you want us to see it.
Well, I'm showing it. I don't know.
Eric, just click the window. For the people in our room here, just click the window yourselves.
Yeah.
I'm
Third
in charge
window
of
from
seeing
the right.
screen.
It's being shared. So anyway, you've got this black absorption line at the hydrogen alpha wavelength, and when that hydrogen atom absorbs it, it wants to re-emit it. So it re-emits the light. And when it re-emits it in every direction away from itself. Okay? So when it absorbed the light, it made a black line right there, 656 nanometers, clear, thick, black line. When the hydrogen atom re-emits the light, you, the observer, get a tiny portion of the re-emitted light. Okay? And here's what it looks like. The black line is the absorption line created by the hydrogen atom at 656.28 nanometers. But the re-emission line is very, very, very tiny inside the absorption line. And that little tiny slit of red is what you're looking at in a hydrogen alpha telescope. The etalon blocks out everything left and right of that re-emission line, and you're just seeing the re-emitted light from hydrogen atoms in the sun's chromosphere. So you're not seeing the surface, you're seeing the atmosphere of the sun. Now the photosphere does have a lot to do with what's in the atmosphere of the sun, but you're not looking at the surface of the sun when you look in these telescopes. You're seeing the re-emitted light from hydrogen inside the hydrogen alpha absorption line. And with calcium, you're seeing exactly the same thing, except you're seeing the absorbed light from calcium. It makes the atom, you know, it likes it, it absorbs the light, and then it re-emits it. And when the calcium atom re-emits the light, it also becomes ionized. It throws out an electron with it from its outer shell. So you get this black line at 393.4 nanometers, and you get a re-emission line inside of that. And it's called calcium 2K because the calcium atom is ionized and becomes calcium-2. The K is just a letter assigned to the line by Fraunhofer when he was labeling all these lines in the spectrum. It does not mean potassium. Some people will call it calcium potassium, but that's not correct. It's calcium-2K. Now this slide here shows you all of the absorption lines in the sun's visible light spectrum. And every one of these is caused by an electron either falling or gaining energy or losing energy or being emitted totally from the atom. So the one down there on the bottom left, the thickest line in the whole spectrum, is caused by the hydrogen atom, the electron in the hydrogen atom going from the second shell to the third shell when it absorbs the light, and then dropping back down to the second shell when it re-emits the light. So that's a brief primer on what you're seeing in these telescopes. Here's another example of it, and I'll get off this presentation if some people aren't seeing it, but it's very, very important that when you do outreach that you actually say the correct science, because you don't want to lead someone astray in their first experience with this. You want to tell them exactly what it is. And here's a diagram of the hydrogen alpha light being produced in a hydrogen atom. You can see the electrons falling from the third to the second shell. And there's a picture of the hydrogen alpha wavelength. This is the Venus transit taken by me and Andy Lunt on the top of Mauna Kea. We ran the telescopes that broadcast the Venus transit for NASA. And that's what it looks like through a 80 millimeter telescope that fit in my carry-on bag and the Mac Pro that I'm using right now. And of course, when you go to the calcium K, like I said, the calcium becomes singly ionized by absorbing the energy from the sun's photosphere, and it just sheds an electron and becomes ionized, and it also emits a photon at that wavelength, and you get an image that looks like this. This is the same Venus transit taken in calcium from that same carry-on telescope. So in this image, you're also looking at the chromosphere. You're looking at a little bit higher level of the chromosphere than you are in hydrogen, but you're still looking at the sun's chromosphere. So everybody knows about white light. That's the same Venus transit in white light. And white light is just like nighttime astronomy. It's all the wavelengths of light put into a telescope and reduced in brightness. So that's the three main ways to look at the sun. I'll go ahead and stop that screen share so we won't confuse anybody. There we go. And that's me from a second angle. Okay, so did anybody have any questions on that at all? Is anyone still awake?
We're all still here. The calcium K, it shows more of the bright regions, whereas and you may be getting into this, but it shows like the brighter regions around the spots, whereas the H-alpha scopes you're seeing more filaments and prominences, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you gotta remember also from basic spectroscopy that the hydrogen light is a much lower energy level, much less energetic than the calcium. The 393 nanometers is a much shorter wavelength, much higher energy. So you're seeing features that emit higher energy than you are with the hydrogen.
Right.
So the
white. You do not use calcium Ks visually, right?
You can, if you have a big enough scope and a specially modified calcium filter, you can see the calcium light. You know, it's ultraviolet. It's near ultraviolet, so it's not the safest thing to stare at with your eyes. The reason they're so dark in most telescopes is because Lunt and Coronado and Daystar, they all make them dark enough so that they're not liable for eye damage. You can, at your own risk, of course, manipulate these filters and make them a little bit brighter. Mm-hmm. But it's mainly an imaging wavelength. But the features that you see in calcium, like the bright areas around the active regions that you're talking about, those are called plage, which is a French word that means beach. And what you're seeing in any of these telescopes, the brighter the light, the hotter the plasma. So hydrogen alpha is the least energetic of the visible light wavelengths you can see on the sun. And people are always asking me, well, how come I can't see them through these glasses? These are the glasses that I give away at the outreach events. We go through about 100,000 of these a year. Well, you can't see them because the red light is overpowered. If you let any other wavelength in, it just overpowers all the red. So the features that you see in hydrogen are the lowest or least energetic features that you can see visually on the sun. The features you see in calcium are the most energetic features that you can see on the sun. And of course, when you let the white light, when you're looking at white light, you're allowing in the yellow and the green, which is 80% of the sun's emission, and none of the narrowband features are visible any longer. So it's a little bit different than nighttime astronomy in that you're trying to reduce the light as much as possible and still retain contrast, where all you guys at night are spending a fortune to increase the light as much as possible and retain the contrast. So it makes for some stark differences in the hobby. One of them is I got a buddy here in Atlanta named Paul Tankersley who takes absolutely fantastic deep sky images. And I'll talk to him and he'll have a new image out and I'll say, hey, how'd you get that image? And he goes, this is 6 weeks worth of exposures. This is 150 hours of exposures. And, in three or four different wavelengths and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, are you kidding me, man? It took you 2 or 3 months to get that picture? And then I'll bring him over and we'll do some solar. And from start to finish with a world-class solar image, you're talking about maybe 5 minutes. That includes capturing the image on any day, and it doesn't matter what the light pollution is. I mean, it's good to have clear skies, but you can get a fantastic solar image from downtown Atlanta like I do routinely. There's nothing to it. So that's one of the main differences. It's very easy. So I encourage everybody listening to really strongly consider this, because this is the fastest growing part of astronomy in the world. It may be a 3-month learning curve to get world class. Within the first day, you can take a beautiful solar image, and even if you don't want to image, you can see something that is just fantastic. I mean, it's got every bit of the wallop that seeing Saturn for the first time in a telescope does. Everybody remembers that, and it gets people hooked on astronomy. The sun has got something going on every day that's different and unique. Whether it's solar maximum or solar minimum, you've always got chromospheric activity. So I strongly recommend it to anybody who's looking to either increase their arsenal of astronomy or just get into astronomy at all, because it puts a lot of things in perspective in your life and makes you feel a lot better about things in general when you see how insignificant most of our problems are down here compared to the sun. So I think we're going to maybe do some image processing, or at least show you what the images look like in raw data.
Hey, can I ask a question real quick?
Of course.
So how narrow does your hydrogen alpha filter have to be before you can start seeing some of that, right? So like a 12 nanometer hydrogen alpha filter that you would use for deep space won't show any of the detail that you see in the HF.
Remember back the slide I showed you of the H-alpha emission lines? There's my dog and the wife. Uh-oh. Yeah. Hey, baby. The middle line in the hydrogen alpha emission slide that I showed you earlier, that line is about 0.9 angstroms in width. So a 12 nanometer hydrogen alpha nighttime filter would be something like 12,000 times that width. So you would just be looking at the photosphere in with a red tint on it with a big nighttime H-alpha filter. The blocking filter in these telescopes, it's a 2-step process to get a hydrogen alpha image. The Etalon produces a peak at 656 nanometers. That's about 1 angstrom in width. But it also produces a lot of peaks on the side. And what you do is you use the Etalon here and then a blocking filter on this end. And this blocking filter is basically a nighttime hydrogen alpha filter. But it cannot be used by itself. It has to be used in conjunction with this one, because the Etalon produces the peak, but you need something down here to block off all the side peaks produced by the Etalon. So using the nighttime H-alpha filter by itself, number one, it would explode if you focus light on it. And number two, you'd just be looking at the photosphere with a red tint on it. So the telescopes behind you, let's see if I can show that. That is a 6-inch Lunt hydrogen alpha telescope on top there, and it's got 2 Etalons, as you can see, 2 pressure-tuned Etalons. And then the telescope below it is a 6-inch, just regular nighttime refractor from Skywatcher, but it's got a calcium K module on the end of it. And something about the calcium scopes, you can use calcium K modules on any refractor. You don't have to buy anything else except the module itself and put it on the back of a refractor, and you'll have a calcium K telescope. It's a much wider bandpass. It's a 2.4 or 2 angstrom I'm sorry, 2 nanometer bandpass on the calcium modules. But the hydrogen alpha filters have to cut down to somewhere below 0.9 angstroms. And the lower you go with that resolution, like the scope behind you is 0.55 angstroms resolution, the more contrast you get on surface details when you're seeing hydrogen alpha. So if you've got a big 1 angstrom bandpass like a Coronado PST or a single Etalon scope, you'll get very bright prominences, but you're not going to get much surface detail. You've got to cut that resolution in half and cut that peak down to about 0.5 angstroms to start seeing real high resolution surface detail. And some people have probably heard the term double stacking. When you double stack a hydrogen alpha telescope, that's what you're doing. If you add a second Etalon to a hydrogen alpha telescope, you do 2 things. You reduce the brightness by 40%, and you also reduce the resolution by about 0.7. So you'll go from 0.9 angstroms down to about 0.55 or 0.6 angstroms with a double stack telescope. And that makes a big difference with what you see. So I hope that answered your question.
Absolutely. Thanks, man.
So let's look at
Steve, before you get back into imaging, Tolga has a question for you. Can you ask about that 80 millimeter double stack with the bino viewer that we all saw at NEAF?
Yeah, Stephen, I can have a little info on that. We looked through 80. Sorry, I'm hearing. I don't know if you guys are hearing it, but we looked through an 80 millimeter double stack lens at NEAF, and it had a bino viewer, a Denkmeyer bino viewer on it. There we go. And the view was awesome. The view was like probably the best single solar view I've ever seen, and I've never gotten a bino viewer working, and they say it almost increases, it gives the visual impact of a 0.2 angstrom increase. What do you think of bino viewers for visual? What are your thoughts?
Well, as you can see, I've got a pretty large head. I'm a Georgia medium, which is a 4X for anybody outside of Georgia. But bino viewers in outreach don't work very well because everyone's eyes are at different distances, from each other. So when you're using a bino viewer in outreach, it's not a great idea. But for personal use, it greatly accentuates the 3-dimensional feel of the telescope. So highly recommend it for individual use. And you have to have a lot of in-focus to use a bino viewer. You have to be able to push your entire module and focuser in much further with a bino viewer. So the Lunt scopes are all designed to have that much in-focus. The Coronados don't have quite as much in-focus on them, and I don't know about Daystars. I think they use a quark, so it would just depend on your refractor. But the Lunt 80 that you saw at NEAF, that's what I use for all my imaging most of the time because it's very lightweight, yet it's an exceptionally good telescope, and I think it's probably the best value scope on the market at $3,200, I believe, from Lunt Solar Systems. There's 2 ways to double stack it. You can double stack it internally, which is what you saw at NEAF, or you can add an external Etalon onto it and double stack it that way as well. That telescope is a winner, in my opinion. It's small enough to stick in your carry-on, which is where all those images from Hawaii came from that I showed you earlier. I was using a Lunt 80. It's a great scope. So the view in it was particularly good that day, mainly because I was the one that tuned it. And no, I'm teasing you. But they did have a much larger telescope out there. The 152 was there that day, and the seeing conditions just did not permit the 152 to work at its maximum yield. So the 80 was outperforming everybody that day because it was a little bit of cirrus cloud in the sky. So the lower resolution really paid off, the lower aperture. So I do appreciate that comment. We had a bunch of people at NEAF looking through the scopes, and everybody said that the double stacked 80 was outperforming everything on the field that day, and I agree with them.
Yeah. And do you think it was purely sky conditions, or is that scope magic? Because
every one of these telescopes is different. They're all handmade. There's no machining process done. They're all hand assembled and handmade, and there's a little bit of variance between them. So I would say you just had an exceptionally good scope, and you also had sky conditions that required a smaller aperture telescope to perform best. That's what I would say in that case. And most of us don't live in an area where you have 10 out of 10 seeing conditions every day. Most people live in urban centers. So trying to use this big 6-inch telescope in a city, you're not going to get anything more than you would get with the 80 millimeter, except that you have to carry around a lot of extra weight when you're setting up. So
a little bit less weight in your wallet.
Oh yeah, definitely. This scope is $14,000 behind us. The Lunt 80 is $3,000.
Yep.
So all the images that I publish online and the ones that are hanging in the World Observatory, yada yada, they were all taken with the Lunt 80mm scope, because that's the easiest one to image with, and that's the one I set up at my outreach events for the students to take their images with. So if that tells you anything.
Yep. Thank you.
Let's look over here and show you some raw data. Okay, this is raw data from the Point Grey Grasshopper 5-megapixel camera, and this is showing you a gigantic X-class solar flare that went off back in October of this year. And you don't see a whole lot of movement unless you look closely, but you can see it going in and out. I'm using a solar guider on my equipment. Those of you that do solar astronomy have probably heard of that. The high node solar guider keeps the sun really, really centered well in these telescopes. And this is a X-class solar flare as viewed from a Lunt 80mm scope. And you can see my mouse there, right? Okay. Obviously, this is the flaring region, and this is a sunspot and a sunspot. This feature here, for those of you that don't know, this is called a filament, and this is called a prominence. Okay, these are not solar flares. These are not solar flares. These are not solar flares. This is a solar flare. So this is millions of degrees plasma that is erupting from the surface due to reconnection of similar polarity magnetic field lines. The rest of this stuff is average solar features. This is what you see every day on the sun. This one here is called a philoprom. For some reason, they call them prominences when they're on the side and you're viewing them against the background of space. But when you see one on the surface and you're looking down on it, they call it a filament. And it is a little bit darker in color because it's cooler than what's beneath it. So over here, it's brighter than the background because it is hotter than deep space. But over here, it's cooler than the surface that's behind it.
Even, I'm sorry, we aren't seeing your mouse pointer, so you may just want to explain which features are which. The brighter one is the...
Yeah, the dimmer the feature, the cooler the plasma.
Yep.
So this brings up a good point, too, if those are interested in doing solar imaging. Using a color camera is a waste of your time with hydrogen alpha because it's just, you know, think about it, it's just one wavelength of light. So it's the definition of monochrome. And trying to shoot these images with a color camera is going to be nothing but frustrating. So I strongly suggest a monochrome video camera, video CCD chip, something like a DMK51 or the ZWO 174 camera, or maybe the Celestron 274. But get something monochrome that can shoot about 15 frames a second or more. And the bigger the chip, the easier it is, because you want to get the full disk of the sun on the chip. So if you get a camera that can only fit a quarter of the sun on the chip, then of course you're going to have to do at least 4 panels to get a full disk, and you're going to have lighting issues and things like that. So if you want to do full disk imaging, get a chip that's large enough to fit the disk of the sun on. The DMK51 works really good for the Lunt 60, if you people have the 60s, or even the Coronado 60. That'll all fit on a DMK51 chip. This camera that we're using here is a Point Grey Grasshopper, original generation Grasshopper, and it's got a 5-megapixel chip that's 2,400 pixels by 2,000 pixels, and it'll easily fit the entire sun with room to spare. But this is what the data looks like raw. So in a minute, we're going to process this image and show you how to do it. Any questions before we go on?
Is that camera USB 3?
No, it is a FireWire camera. I am one of the few Mac only astronomers. It does come in a USB version, though. It does come in USB 3.
Yep.
I use software called Astro IIDC, which was written by Milton Apperell in Canada several years ago, and he's out of business. Nobody would pay for it, so he went out of business. But I did buy the rights to use the software in perpetuity in my astronomy program. So I'm using Astro IIDC to record and stack all these images. Speaking of Astro IIDC, we'll start that, and let me get things situated. You can make a comment or two while I'm getting it going here for processing if you want.
Yeah, all I'll say is with Deep Sky, we say the laptop doesn't really matter, or the acquisition laptop doesn't really matter. But for solar or planetary, it's good to have a USB 3 port or a FireWire port or an IE, whatever that is, 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever it is.
1394.
You need the frame rate. You need that bandwidth to be able to get all those frames per second.
Yeah, and you need a really fast hard drive. So a solid state hard drive is a really good addition to your. You guys use laptops. I just carry an iMac out with me and plug it in. Yeah, so a solid state drive is pretty crucial to getting the maximum frame rate from the camera. I'm going to start this Astro IDC. First, let me screen share again. And like I say, feel free to break in. I really much prefer an interactive presentation where everybody's involved. So let me get rid of this screen. That's kind of a cool effect there, huh? Okay.
Yeah.
So I'll zoom that down, go to Astro IDC, and I want to stack a movie. So it's going to ask me which movie here in just a moment, hopefully. There you go. Which movie would you like to stack? Well, I happen to have one here. Oh, the Mac Pro is going slow. There we go. We're going to stack this X-Class FLIR movie that we just looked at. Now it's asking me some stuff. Now this is, don't worry about it. This is the same stacking software that everybody else uses, just because it's on a PC and it looks a little bit differently. Stacking images, I'm sure everybody here knows what that is, but I'll tell you, you take a bunch of frames and you get some software to pick out the sharpest frames, and you take the resulting sharpest frames and you put them together and you align them on high contrast features, and then you squash them all down into one image. It is the same exact effect as taking a long exposure nighttime shot, except you can't expose the sun over, about 0.3 milliseconds, or sorry, over about 30 milliseconds, or you're just going to have a big overexposed blob. So with bright objects like planets or the moon or the sun, you just take several hundred quick successions of. Hang on just a second, y'all. Just a second.
I think he muted himself, but I think we're just waiting for it to stack. Sometimes when you click stack, it messes up with your mic. Nope, I think he's back. There we go.
Sorry about that.
No problem. No problem.
Anyway, so what you're doing is taking the high contrast features on your resulting frames and squashing them all down into one picture. So it's the same effect as a long exposure deep sky shot, except you're using very short duration exposures as your subs, it's called. So in here, we're going to tell it to stack. Stacking is a comparison of photographs, which are basically spreadsheets of pixels that have different values of brightness. And it makes an array for each image, and it goes in and it compares, like one pixel here, there might be a 7 or a 200 in value. It finds similar contrast features in each frame and then aligns the picture onto those images. It's all math. So right now what it's doing is taking the 600 frames that I shot, and it's calculating the sharpness of these frames. Now it's telling me, if you can see this, how many of these frames would you like to stack? I like to move my indicator until I have about 30 frames. That's 30 out of 600. That's about 5%. And this is the same thing in Registacks as you would use for your confidence interval or your best frames percentage. 5% of your frames you want to stack. So we'll say OK. And this is the automated version of just the stacking, which we'll try this first time, and I can also show you the manual version of it in just a second. But let's see what it shoots out. This software stacks. It aligns every pixel in the image unless you tell it to do something different. So that's what it's doing right now, and we'll see what kind of image it gives us.
Stephen, you mentioned Registacks. For those of us without access to this program, Registacks or AutoStacker, what other programs are out there?
Well, you have for the PC, Registax Auto Stacker, Deep Sky Stacker. For the Mac, you have nothing. Nobody makes any software for Mac astronomy that I know of. I know there's that all-in-one package. I forget the name of it. Starts with an M. But currently, there's no software capture and stacking program I can recommend for a Mac, and I say that in great dismay. I wish the industry would put something out. Since this guy stopped making Astro IDC, which is a capture and stacking program, there is nothing available. And I hate to say that. I wish I could tell you better news, but there's nothing available. So this image is what came out of the stacking program. Let's drag that down to Photoshop and take a look at it. And that's what you have. So let me fit that to the screen. And this basically looks just like one frame of the movie. I mean, the scene that day was pretty good. So the first thing I'm going to do in processing this image is I'm going to crop it to a usable size using a mask tool. If anyone wants to jump in and ask me what I'm doing, do so, because this goes pretty fast. So we're using the rectangular crop tool, and there you go. With solar, now there's a million different ways to do this. This is how I do it, okay? Very simple. I go to the filter menu. I choose the Smart Sharpen feature. Smart Sharpen allows you, it's exactly like Registack's wavelets feature, if anybody's ever used wavelets. So you can choose a little region there, and you want to be pretty careful with sharpening on solar images, and here's why. There's nothing sharp on the sun. The sun is a big ball of gas, plasma. So there's no craters, there's no rocks, there's no sharp edges. One of the biggest things I see in people's solar images that are detracting is that they've over-sharpened it so much that it just looks unnatural. So we'll choose a mild amount of smart sharpening, 3 pixels, 130%, and do that. And then what I like to do is go in and choose some levels overall. And levels has got a few good features. Like if you've got noise or haze in the background, which we don't in this image, but we will later, you can choose this black point button here and say, this is black. And it makes it very, very dark, very high contrast, dark background with the limb. You lose some of your edge detail that way, so you can go back in and touch it up some. But that's what black is. So I've set black. Now, back to sharpening again. Unsharp mask, this is something called iterative unsharp. And I don't know if everybody knows this or not, but this is what you do. Instead of doing like a big high radius Super Mac Daddy sharpening that looks terrible, like this, which you see a lot on the internet, go down to about 1 pixel radius, 1.5 pixel radius, and do about 40%. Just a very, very, very mild sharpening. Do it once, and then just keep doing it until you've gone as far as you can. Do it in steps instead of doing it all at once. It just gives a much, much better finished product. Very subtle sharpening. See, that's a little bit too much. So now I can back off on that, step backwards. Okay, now this particular image was pretty good seeing that day. So if you wanted to stop here and just color it, you would be done. And I'll show you what I mean. I use curves to color the image. Oh, look at that. It won't let me do it because it's still monochrome. Let's go back to image and choose mode, RGB color. Now I can use my curves feature and just go in here and choose the red channel and play around, see what it looks like. Let's go try the green channel. Ooh, that's funky. And then go to blue. And I happen to know that the blue channel on hydrogen alpha images, if you take it all the way out, it makes everything look a lot better. Look at that. That's already, I mean, that's pretty much done. Let's go back to the red channel and brighten things up a tad, like so. So, in my opinion, that's a finished image. Now, there's a million things you can do with this image. You can brighten it up super bright. You can make it more evil looking. Something cool I've seen people do before is come in and use the polygonal mask tool and this bright area here. A lot of people would like to add some glow to this. So I've seen guys like Paul Stewart, who might be on the program now, will come in and just draw around this. This is kind of cheating, but you know, it's all about the art, in my opinion. Just kind of mask off this flare. Get back over here. Go in and choose lots of feathering. You want to
It's
feather.
not cheating, it's embellishment.
Yeah, embellishment. You want to feather it a fairly large amount, and then just go and adjust the levels on that only, and kind of give it some glow, like so. Now deselect that, and look at that. I mean, it just gives it a brighter, weirder kind of glow. I've seen a lot of guys do that to accentuate things. Like I can turn this region right here into a solar flare if I wanted to, which I'm not going to do. But that's that. Let me take a couple of steps back here and show you something else. Your first images with the sun are probably not going to look like this. Let's go and make it grayscale again. Now, let's say you got a crappy image and it doesn't look as well as you'd like it to. We'll turn up the image like so. What you'll see a lot on the internet is you'll see people inverting the entire thing. When you invert this image, ooh, it's nice and evil. Look at all that. That's really evil looking. Then you can mess with the levels and get something that looks like that. This is very popular with solar astronomy because it makes the features stand out a great deal more. And if you have a bad image or an image that's got a lot of noise in it or something, when you invert it, it makes it look a million times better. So I kind of chuckle at that because those of us that do this a lot know that when you see an inverted image, it's probably because it just wasn't very good. And the guy wanted to make it look better, so he just inverted it.
I do that on my white light images.
Yeah.
Yeah, because
it makes them look better. Even if it is a good image, it also makes your good images look a little bit better sometimes. So you see this a lot on the internet. And then you can also go in and color this. That is, after you make it a RGB image. Let's see. I think I have some saved in here. No, I don't. All right, let's go take all the blue out. Blue just looks bad on hydrogen alpha. Let's throw some of that. Do some of this. Okay. And then this handy dandy black point I was just telling you about. Let's see what that does on this image. If I go over here and say, hey, this is black. Oh, that didn't work too well. Never mind that. So anyway, there's another finished image inverted using solar, and you can still see the glow effect around this solar flare. So this is a different way to do it. And all that took, if I hadn't been explaining it to you, would have took about 45 seconds from start to finish to finish that image. So let's go look at another movie if everyone has time. Here's a more okay, good. Here's a more typical solar image from an average day. View. Okay, fit to screen. There we go. View, fit to screen. Okay. Now you can see this image is bouncing around a little bit too because it was pretty windy this day. So this is more of an average kind of image you'll see from your beginners to intermediate level solar imagers. And you won't be able to, you can't really see it now unless you know what to look for, but this area, and can you guys see my mouse?
Yes, now we can.
Okay. This area is brighter than the rest of it. This is called uneven illumination. And it's very common in solar scopes, and it's a million different things cause it. But unevenly illuminated solar images are very common. We're going to show some techniques to try to get rid of some of that. Okay, so there's the raw video. Now let me go back to Astro IIDC. Choose that movie. And this time we're going to tell it to let us manually select the areas we want stacked. Let's see. use manually selected. Okay. So it's going to compare the sharpness of all these frames. In the meantime, let me show you a cool image I took the other day of a calcium K prominence. This is just a raw, dirty image. That's the sun's limb. This is a calcium K prominence that shot off the edge of the sun, and it's already about 1 solar diameter. And it just kept going and eventually became this image. And this is about 1.5, 2 solar diameters in length. And that's what a calcium K ejected prominence looks like. This is about 2 solar diameters away from the sun when I was capturing this. So this is some of the cool stuff you can see in solar astronomy. Okay, back to this. I was asking this, how many frames would you like in your finished product? I'm going to use 30 or so again. Now this time it's going to ask me, okay, choose some alignment points. Now, there's a sunspot. I'll choose that high contrast feature. I'll choose that. I'll choose this kind of transparent filament here as one of my alignment points. And I'll go down here and choose that filament. Just find some high contrast stuff. There's a beautiful prominence right there. Let's align on that. So I picked 8 alignment points. And now Registax is going to, not Registax, I'm sorry, Astro IIDC is now going to create 8 different stacked images. And then it's going to take all 8 of those and automatically combine them into one. That's just one of the features of that software. One of the really cool features. So we'll wait for a second for that to happen. Anybody got anything they want to talk about?
How common are the calcium K prominences?
Extremely common. They're usually, if you have a hydrogen alpha prominence, which is a lower energy level, you will almost always have a higher energy component to that prominence. And if you look at it in calcium, you'll see a slightly different shape. And one thing about ejected prominences is when the prominence gets ejected into the corona, it always heats up drastically. So you'll see it in hydrogen alpha for a few minutes when it gets ejected, and then it'll just vanish in hydrogen alpha. And it's not going away, it's getting more energized. And so it starts to emit its light in calcium wavelengths. So you can see it much longer normally looking at the more highly energized calcium wavelength than you can in the hydrogen alpha wavelength. So whenever I see an ejected prominence, if I have the calcium scope set up, and I usually do, I will switch over to calcium and watch it from then on in calcium.
Will you be able to see that in a 60
Stephen,
millimeter
there's a question
calcium?
going on about what version of Photoshop you'd recommend, and
The latest.
if you've got any answers for that.
I don't like subscription software, so I use Photoshop 6, which is the latest version that you can install on your own computer without being on the internet. But it doesn't matter what version it is. You're using about 1% of the features in Photoshop, so it doesn't matter how old the version is. As long as it's got sharpen and color, that's fine. Photoshop is maximum overkill for this process. You can use any basic graphics software, but I just happen to already know how to use Photoshop, so that's why I'm using it. It's not mandatory by any means. So my software is still creating the 4th out of 7 pictures, and we're waiting for that to occur. And again, this is Astro IIDC, which unfortunately is no longer available for purchase. But it's basically the same as any other stacking program. They're all the same. There's number 5.
What kind of benefits would you see if you stacked more frames?
Blur. Things are moving pretty quick on the sun. Granules in white light last about 5 minutes, and they move drastically in that time frame, and prominences are moving at 45 to 60,000 miles per hour. So if you extend your capture more than about 1.5 minutes, you're going to have so much blur that you won't be able to stack it. So I suggest a decent camera that's going to capture something big like 5 megapixels or bigger and stacking about 30 frames, because anything more than that starts giving you a bunch of blur. You got to get in there and get out with solar, because it's changing all the time. It's not like the moon's surface where you can take 50,000 frames and stack the best 5,000. because 5,000 frames on the sun, your entire surface of the sun might be completely regenerated in that 5,000 frames.
Really? 2 minutes, huh? Is that about tops?
Yeah, I would say 2 minutes would be the tops. Really, you want to get it done in about 30 seconds if you can. Especially when you go to high focal length imaging of prominences close up or something. You want to get that done as soon as possible. So the higher the frame rate, the better. Almost done. Okay, so now what I've got here is that image. That is the first stacked image. There's the second one, and these are all just individual alignment points that are stacked. So let's go down to the bottom one and put them all together. And there's 7 individual alignment points, and all the images blended together into one image. Let's open that in Photoshop, see what that looks like. Okay, like I say, the first thing I'm going to do is crop it so it looks like I had it centered properly the whole time. That's also cheating. And then have it fit to the window. And you see it needs a little sharpening. You could use some illumination correction. And you know, this is what it looks like though when you're looking at it. It's not like this is a bad image, because this is what the sun looks like. We as astronomers and imagers like to sharpen things up so much. We like to put a lot of, what was the word, embellishment onto it to make it look better. So here comes the embellishment. In my opinion, if you wanted to just be done with this image and color it, you could be done with it. But everybody likes to fiddle with their images. So let's do some fiddling. I start with Smart Sharp. And you can see already what a massive difference that makes. I don't know if this is going over the internet, but look at that prominence on the left-hand side. That's without it, and that's with it. So it's a big, big difference right off the bat. So we'll do that. And then I'll show you something that a lot of people do, and that is they'll mask off the surface. So I've got the magnetic lasso tool, and I'm going to just draw a circle around the surface itself with the intent of processing the surface differently than the prominences. Because a lot of people like to get their surface a lot darker than this and higher contrast. But me, I capture the proms and the surface in one go. And then if I want to, I'll just process down the surface to look better. Some people will take a different exposure for the surface with a lower gamma. Hang on just a second, everybody.
Yeah, as you're doing that, that's one thing I've experienced. I have difficulty getting both surface and proms with my single stacked 60 millimeter.
Yeah, well, it depends on the camera. A 16-bit camera is a must for that. 8-bit camera is probably not going to do it.
Yeah, you know, I was wondering about that because my camera, I have the PGR Chameleon, and it has 16-bit mode, but it drops to 5 frames per second when I run it.
Mm-hmm.
So
well,
I guess
okay. That's fine for a full disc. That's no big deal. The way I get that with the PGR is I just increase the gamma and make it super, super sensitive. And I capture it. So it looks kind of fuzzy here. It looks like it's washed out. But that's the way I capture it, so I can get the surface and the proms in one go. Then if you mask this off, now I made a little boo-boo over here, but every time you mask anything on the sun, you want to always feather it. So we'll feather it about 3 pixels so that anything you do to it smoothly transitions into what was there before. And I'm also going to contract it a couple of pixels. You'll see why. All right, so we've got the surface masked off. Let's do some levels. Darken it up a little bit. See that? Looks a million times better already. And a lot of people will come in here and just invert the surface only, which looks pretty cool too. Like that. Now you can really see the uneven illumination in that though. So I'm not going to do that on this one. So we brought it down a little bit with levels. You can even bring it down more, but if you go too far, watch what happens to the limb. It starts getting real dark, and the transition is real ugly up here on the limb. So let's not go that far. Let's just go about right there. Okay, and then I'll just deselect that. Now, if you notice over here, you've got kind of a weird boundary between the edge It looks kind of funky. So this is some other cheating that I do routinely. I'll take that part that I masked off, try to smooth it as much as I can, and then check this out. I'll just cut it from the image and then repaste it. And don't tell anybody, okay? This is top secret. Just repaste it and make it bigger so it covers up the boo-boo. Let's see. Like so. And then, hang on just a second. I'm trying to find my handles. Let's do that. It's not showing me my handles, so I can grab it. Show. Where's that? Well, for some reason I'm not showing my handles on here. Anybody know where that is in the menu?
Are you transforming it?
Yeah, I'm trying to grab the handles.
Excuse me. I think if you click it again, there's something in the corner box, like on the actual image. What happens when you?
Isn't it under Edit Transform?
Transform. Okay. All right. Now, just make it a little bit bigger. Am I cheating? Well, maybe. Okay, so now you don't have that weirdness on the edge anymore, and you have a beautiful image. So, but now we have 2 layers. So I'm working on this layer only. And I might come in here and knock the brightness down some, give a little more evilness to it, a little higher contrast. Do that. And then I'll go in here and flatten the image. Then I'll go over here and do some colors, just like I did before. Oops, I forgot to turn it into monochrome. So let's go back to mode, RGB color, image adjustment, curves. Turn the blue all the way down. Give some green. Maybe some red. Etc. And let's go in and want to get rid of that red background if we can. We'll choose levels and choose the black point and choose that. Real nice. And then maybe brighten the whole thing up some. This part right here, I just didn't make it big enough to cover that little edge, but you get the idea. So that's the kind of stuff you see on the internet. Now let's go in and do some final iterative unsharp. Like I was telling you, just a very small amount, and do it 3 or 4 times, and you're done. This is a pretty good image, if you ask me. And this came from a really crappy, some really crappy data. So I thought that came out real nice.
Stephen, I still see that hot spot right about about 10. Are you going to do anything about that? Do you generally, what do you do?
High pass filter is really about the only thing you can do if you've got it recorded in there. And of course you would do that with the monochrome image. Let's see if we can go back to, well, let's just revert all the way back. This is going back to its original state before we did anything. It'll take a second. Okay, so filter, high pass. Come in here and put it just about all the way to the right. And it'll take a second because it's a big to-do, and I'm on a 7-year-old Mac.
While it's running, someone's asking, do you focus manually?
Oh yeah, I focus manually. You can use a sissy focus. I mean, an automatic focuser if you want. But I take all these images during outreach events, and I don't even take them. I let the kids come up and just press the buttons. So I have it all set to record 600 frames automatically. And if a kid comes up there and he likes what he sees, I say, yeah, just press the button. So they actually record all of my movies that I use to stack. I don't hardly ever go out and do imaging on my own. It's always some fifth grader pressing the buttons, and I just take the data and make images out of it.
What do you focus on? Like a sunspot or a prominence? The limb?
No, I focus on whatever I see. I mean, I focus on the entire disk. You know, it's kind of hard to say I focus on this always, because the center of this disk is a lot closer to us than the edge of the disk. It's about a 500,000 miles closer. So it's tough to say. I just try to get the best focus I can visually on the screen and go with that. Now you can see what the high pass filter did for the image. It got rid of a lot of the uneven illumination, but it gave us a lot more of a gray background. So we can come in here and either do levels to bring it back down, like so. It still got a little bit of uneven, but it got rid of a lot of it. And so then I would just start with that image. And I'll show you how quick this happens, you know. Smart sharpen, done. Image, curves, oops. Mode, RGB color, curves, adjust the blue, get rid of it, bring down the green, come in with some red. You're done. Image, levels, choose the black point. Let's say that. Then pump it up a little bit on the left. Let's see. Like so. Throw some iterative unsharp. About 5 of those. Unsharp, filter, unsharp. And you got a solar image. Okay. Now you can mess with it all day and you can put a million different techniques on it that'll give you a little bit of improvement. But in my opinion, you've got a pretty good solar image going right now. Okay. And then let's crop this. We'll be done with it. Okay. Voila. Now the you know, a lot of astronomers, the next step is to slather a 20-point copyright all over the image in case somebody's going to steal it and sell it on Facebook. I don't ever do any of that stuff. I just throw the images out there, and if somebody thinks enough of it to share it or act like they took it, then who cares? Doesn't bother me a bit. So there you go. Now let me turn my camera back on.
I have a question about focal length.
Yes, sir.
For solar, so not hydrogen alpha. All I have is a white light. And I've done a little bit of outreach, but I can never really seem to get sharp focus with a 10-inch SCT focal reducer.
That's all I had to hear.
White light filter, right? Is it just because the focal length is too long?
No, it's because you've got way too much aperture.
Yeah, is that it?
Way too much aperture. If you're using a glass Orion filter, a lot of people use those. You'll never get a good focus with glass. Beta filter over the objective is the best possible way to use on a reflecting telescope, and masking it down to about 100 millimeters will give you a 10 times better image than trying to use all 10 inches of aperture.
So mask is the key. Just mask it down, right?
Yes, sir. 100 millimeters is optimal for white light. For a full disk image of white light, that is the way to go. People, you know, I did it myself. I had a C14 for a while, and I got a big 14-inch glass filter and put on the end of it, and it always looked horrible. And then I got an 80 millimeter refractor and put some beta film on the end, and it was fantastic, unbelievably good. So over 4 inches, you are just going to blur the image with aperture, in my opinion.
So I shouldn't buy a continuum filter to fix that problem with my SCT.
Of course you should. You should buy everything you could possibly buy. But you'd be a lot better off just masking it down to about half the size of the aperture.
Interesting.
Yeah. A green Celestron 58 filter is the best filter you can possibly use to image in white light.
Huh.
With a monochrome camera, of course.
Yep.
That's what I suggest using. There's lots of fancy things you can put on your scope and try to get better images, but every time in solar, every time you put another piece of glass in between you and the subject, it's just going to make it look even worse and worse and worse. So if you're not getting a magnificently significant increase in quality, then you are not doing good with a filter. And that's true for nighttime astronomy also.
So, someone out there's asking if they'll be able to watch this again, and yes, these are recorded to YouTube, so if you subscribe to us on YouTube, you'll see it, or just jump over to our YouTube channel and you'll find it. Another question, how many do you use Barlows? And if so, how many times?
No, I try not to ever use a Barlow, but yes, I do use them for imaging occasionally. I like to use the PowerMates, TeleView PowerMates. I use a 2.5x TeleView PowerMate, and that's about as much as I'll go on the sun. Now again, I'm not a specialist in high resolution, long focal length solar imaging. My specialty is narrowband full disk imaging. So you'll get a bunch of different opinions from a bunch of different people, but what I know how to do is full disk narrowband imaging.
What do you think of the Quark for imaging?
If you've already got an 80 millimeter refractor or less, everybody hang on just a second.
That's Steven's vehicle. If you see that somewhere in a bunch of telescopes set up on the side of the road, stop and look through them. You'll be making a good decision.
Sorry about that. We've got an ill dog inside we're trying to take care of. Yeah, my advice is all for full disk narrowband imaging. I do run several websites though. The main one you'd probably be interested in is solarchat.natka.net, which is accessible from my main site, solarastronomy.org. And what we've got going on there is the best imagers in the world, about 600 of them, who are all on there, and they share anything they know. There's no egos on there. Nobody's bragging about anything. We're all just trying to get other people involved in solar astronomy so that the market will have more choices for us, and we'll get more vendors involved in making products. So this is, of course, a free thing to do, and you can get on there and ask whatever question you want to ask, and you'll get answers from the likes of Alan Friedman or Gary Palmer in the UK or me or whoever. We're all on there, and the whole point of it is to get more people doing this so that we can have richer knowledge and more people doing it. Okay? And my main website is solarastronomy.org, and from there you can go to the Facebook page and join our Facebook group for the Charlie Bates Solar Astronomy Project. You can ask those same questions there, and you will get nothing but friendly, helpful attitudes. You will not get cloudy-nighted on my sites. I don't allow it. We help people get involved in this, and we want to see newcomers. We want to see it because every time somebody new comes along, they usually add something to the hobby that we didn't know about. So we have a slightly different attitude on the solar side of things than I see on some of the nighttime forums. It helps everybody to answer them and also to read the answers.
And that's solarchat.natca.net. Definitely a good place to go.
No, solarchat.natka.net.
Natka.net.
The best way to go to all my stuff is just go to solarastronomy.org.
There you go.
And there's a big band across that has links to all the different websites that we offer, and they're all free, and they invite beginners to come and get into the hobby.
Stephen, could I interrupt you here? Somebody over on the YouTube following couldn't get into the hangout room, asked if these shows will be available later, and the answer is sure. All of the stuff that we do here is recorded and sent off to YouTube, and you can access it either through the main Astro Imaging channel link on Google+, or you can go to the weekly index, and all these things will be referenced there, and you can go find them there. Also, there was somebody, Totem, I think, Teton Works, asked if how you process the prominences and filaments when they stretch from inside the circle to out over the black space when you layer two separate exposures.
Yeah,
and I think you covered some of that, or showed us how you do it in the 30-second version of how you process everything. Is there anything more you need to say? And did you get your answer? Is that Dylan? Dylan was asking that.
Well, the best way to do that is to just take an exposure where you get the prominences and the surface detail in one go, and not to try to combine the two, because you don't want to mask off the disc and cut the philoprom in half, because it always looks terrible. So my advice on a philoprom is just to take an exposure with a high enough gamma so that you get the entire philoprom and the surface in the same exposure, and that way you've got the naturally occurring way it looks. So it's very difficult to combine the two. Let me tell you a little bit about International Sunday while we're here, because I'm going to have to go in about 5 minutes. International Sunday is something that I started last year, and we put it on every year. And I mail out 40,000 pairs of solar glasses to anybody around the world that wants to do solar astronomy outreach, because this is a fantastic way to get involved in science and to also get your community involved in science. And that's the whole reason we do this. I'm not an astronomer. I'm a science advocate. I use astronomy to spread science. So this has done a great deal of good for my life and also for the community around me. But it's so easy, anybody can do this. So one day a year, we try to just send out whatever you need to get yourself going for a solar astronomy outreach event. It's called International Sunday, and last year I launched it from Australia, and we were in over 30 countries in every time zone, and it was a big solar astronomy event that just rolled across the globe in every time zone. We're doing the same thing this year with people all around the world, and there's no charge, there's no fees, we don't allow any charging for anything, there's no religion, there's no crazy politics. It's just science for science sake, and it's you going out and just saying, hey, check this out, man, this is really cool. Come here and look at the sun with me. And you'd be amazed at what a difference that makes when you go and do that. So we're going to launch that again this year from Costa Rica. And we had such a big success last year that we spurned a bunch of spin-off events. So there's a bunch of other events that other people are launching too that sound just like it. It's really taken off, and people are mimicking me all over the place. So you know, they say imitation is the greatest form of flattery. Well, there's about 6 different International Sundays going on now. But if you want to get involved with ours, you just need to join the Charlie Bates Solar Astronomy Project Facebook page, and that's where all the information is. And we'll help you do it, man. Just go out and spread the sun and have a good time.
Thank you. Yeah, if you do outreach and you do solar outreach, you set your scope up on a street corner, you're going to have a lot of people walk up to you and ask a lot of questions.
You won't believe it.
You might get more out of it than they do. You never know.
I do. I definitely do. When I go to schools, I feel guilty sometimes because I enjoy it so much, and these kids say the darndest things, and they just motivate me so much in life. You know, they say the best cure for depression, if you have it, is altruism, and I'd have to agree 100%. And that's just forgetting about your problems and going and trying to help other people do something cool is the absolute best way in the world to live, in my opinion. And they say that when you give away stuff or you give of yourself, it comes back to you tenfold. And that's an easy cliche to say, but in reality, it comes back to you about 10 million fold. If you just sincerely go out and share what you love to do with somebody else, you know, somebody that maybe you wouldn't normally talk to, because we're all so worried about, you know, labeling people these days in this country that nobody shares anything with each other anymore. Get out of your group that you're comfortable in and go get into another group and go find somebody that you might ignore normally and go tell them about what you love to do, whether it's science or music or writing, whatever it is. Go share it, man, because I'm telling you, that is the way to expand your knowledge and your horizons in life. That's the way to live life. Don't stick in your little tiny cliques. You know, get out there and share what you got, because I guarantee you everybody out there has something that you can learn. And that's just the way that I choose to live my life. And I hope you guys will come join me, those of you that are listening. Just come on over to the Charlie Bates Facebook page or solarastronomy.org and come join us. I promise you won't regret it.
Thank you. Yeah, I know I will. When? What's the date of International Sunday?
June 21st, the summer solstice.
June 21st. So we have a little bit under a month.
Yeah, all around the world. It's about 3 weeks, and I'll be in Costa Rica with the wife, and we'll be launching it from down there. And my Australian director is starting it there because that's the first place that sees the day. And we've got a UK director. We're in Bosnia, Kosovo, Germany, England, Portugal, Spain, Tunisia, Morocco, Algeria, Israel, Australia, China. I could go on and on and on. It's all over the world, and it's just a very cool thing to do to get involved in science and get your community involved in science. And listen, I do appreciate you guys inviting me on the show. It's not about me. You know, I don't even use my name. I don't care about all that stuff. It's about spreading science, because science will fix what's wrong right now with extremism, political and religious extremism. It's destroying the world. And the best way to fix it is science. And that's my heartfelt opinion, and that's what I've dedicated my life to. So I do appreciate the invite on the show. I'm going to have to sign off just a tad early, though, so
No
you
problem.
guys are on your own. You guys are on your own for the last 10 minutes.
Take care of your dog.
I will. Thanks for the invite.
Thanks a lot, Stu.
Thanks for coming. That was a great presentation. Thank you very much. Yeah, that was a great presentation. Really good. I don't know how many of you do solar.
I think we got all the questions, too.
I think we did get all the questions.
Yeah.
I do want to thank everybody for coming on. I'm sorry, Alex, just for 1 sec. I do want to thank everyone for coming on. Next week, we're actually having our anniversary show. It's been a year that we've been doing this, so you guys are welcome to come on. We're still planning out what's going to be happening, but it's going to be good, and we're going to be posting that shortly. We're always looking for contributors, so feel free to contribute. And otherwise, just again, thank you for coming, and another thanks to Stephen Ramsey. All right, thanks, guys.